Hello, everybody.
Hello.
All right, today is our first podcast. Jana, would you like to do the honors?
Of course. Okay, then we'll have this new podcast called Buena Onda, and our group members are Brian.
Hello, Brian Ortiz here.
Okay, talk to us about what year you are in Cosmopolitan and major.
So my major is liberal studies, and I am a first year transfer student from Mount San Antonio Community College.
Great. Jacqueline Osornio.
Hi guys, I'm Jacqueline. I am a second year and I am majoring in public health. I don't know exactly what as for my career, I don't know exactly what I'm gonna end up doing, but I'm sure I'll find one soon.
Okay, great. And of course me. My name is Mia Morales. My major is oncology, and this is my last year. So it means that I'm a senior. And next, I'll pass it to Jasmine Messias.
Hi, I'm Jasmine Messinas. I am a second year here at Cal State Fullerton. My major is civil engineering, but I'm gonna be changing it to accounting because I realized that with civil engineering, I like the math part, but not the science part. So with accounting, that's what I'm gonna be doing next year or this spring.
Okay, great. Good to know about you guys. Majors and what year you are in. Okay, now we're gonna start doing our podcast, and our first segment will be taken by Brian Ortiz.
Hello, everybody. So in my segment, we're going to be covering the module for the podcast project, and we're going to be covering how and why, from what we learned in the podcast provided by Professor Obando and his co-host Daniel Topete, who were quite remarkable in providing us a space where they had, in their words, holistic and humanizing pláticas. I learned quite a lot from them, and they provided a lot of insight in what framed our podcast here today. From what I had learned in these episodes, it's just more of a shared space. They talked about a lot of topics about social justice. They talked about ethnic studies. They even covered literary media studies and many other contexts when it comes to gender, sexuality, spirituality, religion, and racism. And from what I was learning here, when we were reading our materials, we had to come up with a theme, right? And going over with my colleagues here in this podcast, we had to figure out what exactly theme we were going for and to find a balance. And the balance that we were looking for was it is a mixture of cultural studies and it is a mixture of social justice. And I do see how this show perfectly intertwines with both when it comes to Vida and the podcast, as both the professors were able to chime in into both topics. And one example that I do want to mention, the professor and his co-host, they mentioned critical media literacy and critical media studies, meaning that podcast members, when analyzing the podcast and the show, we develop a perspective that can either relate or sympathize with how and why people act when considering the time and the conditions of their actions. So I had a conversation with Mr. Obando not too long ago, and he helped me think and to consider the time and the conditions of the characters in the show, because I could not completely understand their actions. I cannot completely understand where they were coming from and why they spoke that way, Another thing that we also learned about to honor and ensure proper commentary and perspectives for all of our colleagues here in this podcast, and so it doesn't feel very one-sided. In the podcast, you have to think critically and understand the challenges that apply to the class. And I had seen so many guests that they had in each podcast that it was quite interesting, the amount of topics that they went over. One of them was from, I believe, was Houston. Another one was from Dr. Walt Jacobs, the Dean of College of Social Sciences from San Jose State University. And in the podcast, they were able to incorporate their work into their lives here that get into these segments. Another example that was really interesting that I want to bring up, that Mr. Danny Topete asked his colleagues and why it really helped how to incorporate everybody else, was he would go on, he'd ask everybody, how does this hurt? Healing shape your theory, the method and practices, and how did this work help? How did this work help the healing? And that's what he was asking the rest of his colleagues. So in a podcast, you learn to ask these questions from the segment that you broke down, and remind yourself that this is a space of, collaboration. And that is it for my segment. I would just like to ask the few of you here, Jacqueline, Jana, and Jasmine, specifically, going into this podcast, how do you feel when you're in this space?
In this space, I would say that I feel extremely comfortable getting to be introduced to like these new readings, and this show that we had to watch made me realize that it's possible for people to be accepting towards one another. Growing up in a Latinx community, it is kind of hard, for my opinion, because this is where I'm from. I feel as if it is hard for like people from my generation to come out to like their parents, because they're so they're like really strict about what they believe, and they're like full on. So knowing this, it really did help me feel like comfortable, safe. Like it showed me that people do understand. What about you guys?
I honestly agree with Ryan and Jasmine in the sense of it being like a comfortable environment. We all got to like respect each other's choices, each other's, I guess, ideas. And if we had like conflicting ideas, like we've had before recording, we do it in a respectful manner. And I feel like that carries a podcast. And I guess that's like the essence of like a good podcast. And a safe environment, like I would say.
Yeah, I feel like when watching Vita series, I understand each of the characters, even though I really don't feel like I could really identify with one of them in a way of, oh yeah, I feel like I have or had the same experiences as Emma. It's just an example, but no, it is just, it got to, I learned pretty much of each of those characters, because there are people out there who are pretty much living through the same experiences. So it's a clear experience of example of what other people might going through. Yeah. So okay. So now we have to the turn to Jacqueline Osorno, who will be sharing segment number 2. Go ahead, Jacqueline.
Hi guys, I'm Jacqueline. I'm going to be going over question number 2, which essentially is about how the characters and the plot of Vida allowed us to think beyond the themes and about the new ways to consider religion and spirituality through the body, mind, flesh, and specifically in this series and unit, Latinx life. One of the themes that this series touches on is the concept of gentrification. For example, there's a scene where Emma and Lynn are eating tacos, and we see how Mari projects her anger onto both of them and calls them white tina bitches, basically blaming them for enabling the gentrification of their neighborhood. And I feel like Mari's anger and about the gentrification, the relocation, and the colonization is valid to some extent, because protesters like Mari are angry that their culture and their identity, it can be jeopardized and erased through these like actions, which is very similar to our past and the historical events that we've came to know. And for example, I have like a personal example. I was born in Garden Grove, but I grew up most of my life in Santa Ana, and I came to know downtown Santa Ana, 4th Street. And I don't know if you guys know what 4th Street is, but it's like basically like a mall, but an outside mall. And growing up, it was like basically Mexican based, with like Mexican like stores and stuff like that. But if you were to go now, it's totally different. Like it's more modern. We see less Mexican like culture, and we see how like obviously it's changed. It's been gentrified. And I remember back in middle school, people were protesting because there's a carousel that used to be there, and then they were taking it off. And then people were protesting that, oh, that's their childhood. How are you taking something away from us? It's not right. It's like who we are. It's our identity. So that's why seeing this scene kind of reminded me of that. And that's why I say that I kind of see her anger valid to some extent, but the way she approached it is totally not the way to do so, because I was disgusted when I saw that scene unfold, because like they're projecting she was basically projecting unnecessary anger towards both of them that have nothing to do with it. And seeing this scene kind of opened my eyes to the way to not do things, and also made me see the ways in which we should, instead of like choosing violence or like abusive behavior, we should like have an open conversation to create like better spaces and promote unity as well in our community. And moving on to a next concept, spirituality. One of the examples includes where Lynn goes through her spiritual journey with getting limpias. And what I took from the scenes where she decides to do limpias, I kind of got that it signifies how she's taking control over her actions now, and a positive change basically. And I feel like this is a really, I guess, a good model for young Latina women who often find themselves in toxic environments, and such as the normalized machismo and the abusive gender inequalities. And I feel like Lynn reflects how Latina women can find a way out of those relationships, and how they could have control over their body and mind, which is she encourages empowerment like within young Latina women as herself. And moving on, the topic of sexuality is weaved through Emma, as we are revealed how her cold and bad persona goes back to her childhood. And we see how Emma opens up about her trauma, her internalized homophobia, and like how she's trying to heal from being sent away after she got caught kissing another girl. And this situation and the consequences Emma faced is especially common for Latinx individuals in Latino households, which is something that each Latino family is different, but like there's always that kind of, I guess, resentment towards homosexuality and sexuality in general. Like we've come like to accept it. Like there's more Latino families accepting it, but there's still some that are completely, you're not going to change them. You're not going to change their ideals, how they are, how they raise their kids. And I guess I kind of, I really felt bad for Emma in that sense, because no one should have experienced that in general, especially dealing with their sexuality. And I feel like it's mainly because often it's because of religion and how like the principles are totally like, I guess it depends on how each Latino family interprets their religion, but like because there's some Latinos who accept it and they're religious. There's others that are completely against it. But on that perspective of like having you know, Latino families like against it, people often, Latinx individuals in those families often find themselves like stuck and not having anyone to guide them, no support. And overall, I feel like this opens a conversation for parents and grandparents and even siblings to have like conversations about sexuality and to prevent the unfortunate situations we saw in Vida with the LGBT plus characters in this series. And that's my segment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jacqueline. Thank you for sharing. And it's my turn now. Okay, on this segment, I'll be talking about how and why home is complex when someone feels lost emotionally and do not know who this person is at a specific time of their lives. Um, One of the examples I found interesting, it was right at the beginning of the Syria of Bida, when Emma comes back home on the day of Bida's funeral. The way I see this, it's when Emma is in the car and she's feeling anxious. She's feeling like don't know how to act. She was even was looking around. Um, and she was like, I feel she was in a way lost. Remember, Emma was separated. She her mother sent her away to live with her grandmother, I believe. And in this way, I see home as like, I feel like Emma was lost. That's in a way that um Emma knew that the Vera's house, it was their house, their her home as well. But since she left home really young, I feel like she didn't feel that connection of a home. I feel like home, it's not just a house, a physical house where you just go and live, sleep, take a shower, or eat. I just feel like home is just where you feel loved, where you feel comprehended, where you feel like you care and somebody else cares about you. And that's number one. And my example number two, it's when Lynn goes to Doña Tita's house to get these limpias. I feel like home in this specific example, once again, it's not about physical house, home, a building where you can go and have dinner. In this example, I can see Lynn as finding her internal self. And in this section, I will quote Bell Hooks. We were talking about her on week number 3. And this quote, it really got my attention because it says, the true teacher is within us. It's by Bell Hooks. And the reading, Building a Community of Love, Bell Hooks, Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know if I pronounce it right, but yeah, so in this specific quote, I relate to Lynn's getting these Olympias at Doña Tita's house because she is, I feel like she has this desire of finding herself, And at the almost at the end of the series, I don't really remember what specific episode is, but when she finally realizes that she has to take care of herself first, when Jupiter, her ex-boyfriend, comes back and he wants to get her back, and she, in that moment, Lynn stands up and says, you know what, this is not what I want for my life. So that specific scene, it got me like, okay, finally Lynn is getting it's finally finding herself. So that's how I interpret it as home. Another example, it's when Maddie and Emma were talking outside on the street, and pretty much Maddie asks and says to Emma, "Hey, why are you painting over the mural?" I remember outside on the street side of the bar, there was a mural, and for Maddie, that specific mural, it was part of her community. It was part of her roots, and that specific scene, to me, Maddie is defending uh her home, her community. That's why this like asking or pretty much telling Emma, hey, why are you painting over the mural? The mural was about, I believe, two girls with aspect of like Aztec indigenous girls. So, and to Mari, remember Mari was part of this vigilantes group. She was like a fighter for the rights for the community. She was there to protect. I go like this because, in a way, it was when at the beginning, Mari is a pro rights, a pro community, but then after Mari noticed that vigilantes is not what it used to be, um, she goes a little bit back and says, hey, this is not what vigilantes was. And Mari realizes that she had to protect her community, her roots. So when it comes to this mural, it made me realize that once again, a home is not just a building. A home is a community. And going back to really quick to a previous reading we read on I believe it was week 4. Uh, the reading was about Sylvia Marcos when um, I believe it was, yes, we're talking about the borderlines. When I see Maddie, I see Emma, I see Lynn, I see one of the other characters like having this internal fight or of being part of a community, but also being true with themselves. So yeah, so these are my 3-4 examples about my segment. So what do you guys think about home and this Bira city Syrian? Sorry.
When I was listening to you about what you were saying about Vida when she passed away, and Emma's, in the car riding, she looks very anxious, she looks very unsure to be here. She had been away from home for such a long time, being in Chicago. A song came up in my head, a song came up to my head, and it was from Ex Ambassadors, and the song is called Unsteady, and one of the lines is mama come here, approach and appear, daddy I'm alone because this house don't feel like home. If you love me, don't let go. If you love me, don't let go. And I hold this song, and I relate it to this show in a way, because if you really think about it, for the first 2 seasons, we were unaware of what was going on in the house. We saw little bits and pieces that Emma did show remorse. She showed sympathy, but it was very short. for a short instant that she showed that she cared about her mom, yeah, we find out that it was, it was the father behind the strings. Yeah, for the first 2 seasons, we had thought it was the mom that had shunned her. And we could see where Emma was coming from, thinking, wow, Vida is such a hypocrite. And so I just thought it was just really interesting because her home wasn't necessarily, like Gina stated, physical space. Her home was her parents, and she was kicked out of her home.
Yeah,
So
true. And then I'm sorry to interrupt, Brian, but also remember on the I believe it was the last episode when Lynn discovers that Vida it was protecting Emma from her father. That's the reason why Vida sent Emma away, just to protect her. And when Emma realizes like a my mother really loved me, that's why she sent me away. It was not just because my sexuality, it wasn't like that. So it was like, oh man, I was shocked. Yeah. So okay, so as I pass it to Jasmine, who will be sharing section number 4. Thank you, Brian, for your collaboration. Appreciate it. And
you're
all of
welcome
you guys, of
anytime.
course.
Okay, so yes, I got section number 4, question number 4, and my question was discussion guides and readings. To what extent does Vida complement, challenge, and or nonce our study of Brown Church, Islam, Buddhism, and Native American ethics, religion, and ways of being in a Latinx life? So I'm first going to be explaining what Brown Church is, because that is the first example that I am going to be using to connect how it ties together with Vida. So the Brown Church is a welcoming place that offers kindness, care, comfort, and support to church families and communities. To add on, like to the word brown, it can be just a descriptive word for many cultural and ethnic groups in the United States. So going more into depth with that, we learned that brownness is like a limit of social, political, and cultural space that you as Latinx people have inhabited since like the longest, maybe like since the US Mexico War. I think since then that's when like they Mexicans started using like the word brown. And then what's unique about the Brown Church is that it brings people together, like large communities together. And then they learn about like the Latinx history, the ethnic studies, the critical race theory and theology into like a new type of academic. And so, the way that ties into Vida, there's a quote from Brown Church. So I'm gonna read it. The quote is, we are told that you can be a Christian and care about issues of racial and gender justice. Christianity is a white man's religion, and it's a tool of settler colonialism. It's racist, classist, and sexist. So we can tie this with Lynn, because after she got baptized, Emma didn't necessarily judge her for it, even though it did deeply hurt Emma, because Lynn was trying to have a close relationship with her dad, and Emma didn't understand why. It seemed as if Emma saw it as our dad left us, he abandoned us, like what's the reason, like what's the point of meeting him now. I remember in the episode she also said how he was really close by and he still didn't have the audacity to go and look for them. So that's the part that really confused Emma on why she was so hurt when she found out that Lynn was went to go see him with behind her back. So my next example is from the reading Double-Edged Marginality and Agency. The purpose of this reading was to know the wider significance on how to contribute to the expanding of literature and intersectionalities. and enhance the visibility of historically understudies and incivial populations whose experiences meet at like the intersecting of multiple dimensions of marginality. So we can connect this with Emma because she meets herself at an intersecting location. So that means that it's like she's like in the middle, like she doesn't know. Well, I'm pretty sure she's aware of like what she wants and who she is, but because she went back to her old community, it kind of made her like upset and anxious and like wonder like, why are you guys like, for example, there was this part of the episode where she walked up to the protesters across the street. She stood quiet, she pointed at something and she was like, that's your enemy, like why are you attacking us, like we are from here, you guys are hypocrites and all that stuff. So that's the part where Emma's like what's going on, like what is this. So that's what I mean about like the marginality and how we could connect that with Emma. And then so I do understand her frustrations and what all the other frustrations that the characters had because they weren't accepted from the place that they were from. If I were to like connect this with me, I wouldn't be able to say that I could relate because like I haven't like left my community and came back. But what about you guys? Like, would you guys be able to? Well, I know Jacqueline did say earlier how like she she grew up in Santana and then she moved to like Garden Grove, and then I know she can, but like what about the rest of you guys? Can you guys connect with Vida?
When I was watching this show, me and Gina had a a thoughtful discussion about it. We were just wondering where we both were coming from like our point of view and our perspective on how we viewed this show and compared it to our life. Also had a conversation with the professor not too long ago, and it's just this show is very different from how we lived. You know, I never lived in that part of the city that they lived in that part of the community. I lived in a very middle class neighborhood, a neighborhood that's very ethnically mixed. We don't have a lot of Caucasian people that do live here. We have a little bit mixed of Hispanic and a little of Asian. And in my community, I've never been that close. I didn't know everybody in my community, and the farthest that I have gone to get to know everybody was mostly students from my school. That's the farthest I would get to know my community. And I remember talking to Gina and telling her about how I don't speak a lot of Spanglish, and yet their form of linguistics is Spanglish. That is something that is very consistent in all their speech, how they choose to talk about other things. Their life is very different, their personalities, and this podcast and going over it just helped me really consider their conditions in their time and why they do the things they do. Would I do the same things? Probably not, but I can see exactly where they're coming from. I can see where, for a while, it was hard to see where Mari was coming from, but I can see that she's coming from a sense of of frustration, and you have to ask yourself why is she frustrated? You start to think that there's this racial or cultural or social like limitation in the community, and that's what she feels like for her.
Yeah.
And that's the whole idea of how gentrification comes into play. And Mari feels like she needs to defend her community, she needs to defend her home, and it's just a lot of things that this show really dives into that's just overall really interesting. And Brown Church remarkably covers where Mari is coming from.
Yeah.
True. So yeah, like Brian said, it depends. So I feel like in my case, I wasn't raised like Emma or either of one of the characters, but I can relate to them. I try to understand them. I try to see as Brian said, I try to understand where they're coming from, because sometimes it is easier for us to judge, just to judge them, but we don't know the reason, we don't know their story. And clearly every character of Vida um, cast has a different process, has a different experiences, and it is really interesting that also I can see it. Some people might live or have a similar view of how life it should be, similar as Link, similar as Emma or Maddie, sorry, or any other characters. But yeah, it is really interesting to watch. It was really interesting. It helped me to understand the way they see culture, the way they see the Latinx community, and also the LGBTQ and plus community. Also, that it has a very important um, part of Vida. So yeah, so what do you guys, well, I just shared my conclusion there, but what are you guys, how do you feel like Vida, this year, just to finish up with the conclusion?
I feel like Viva allows us to like drift away from the this toxicity, and like allows us to heal from the various factors depicted in the show. We are able to like find self-worth, self-identity, and the empowerment of our own culture through these characters in a very realistic like situation and scenario that we can relate to as Latinos, Latinas, Latinx individuals, and it grounds us in a way not to tear apart our community any further. That's my overall I guess summary of what I got from the show.
What about you, Brian? Thank you, Jacqueline. Sorry. Thank you, Jacqueline. What about you, Brian?
Overall, from what I was able to learn from this experience when it came to the podcast and when it came to the show, you begin to ask yourself, okay, would I want to do a podcast myself one time or one day, and be as successful as Professor Obando as he was with his co-host Danny Topete? And I'd like to say I very much would like to do. I would very much like to do my own version of a podcast one day. I've listened to podcasts every single day, and that's all I've ever done when it comes to cars, when it comes to politics, and it comes to medicine for the COVID. And I feel like podcasts are a way of, just keeping yourself up to date of what's going on around you, to be open-minded, to be mindful, to be really sympathetic of what's going on. And when it came to Vida, it was very different. It hits on topics of sexuality, gender, flesh. I was not expecting to see the amount of flesh that I did in this show. But what I did learn that in our culture, or for sure in Chicano studies, in the text, we have learned that sex as its own is a way of expression, a way to connect with our partners, to show love, to show respect. And it's very, obviously very different. And in terms of sexuality or gender norms and gender stereotypes, you start to see the amount of power, the feminism that is emanating from these two characters. Emma, who is very strong and she knows what she wants. She's also always likes to be in control, and you see that in the show. And Lynn, who on the other hand was taught by her mother and other characters in the show that you have to use your beauty to get what you want, which was to me very interesting. I have a mother, I have a sister, and I have sister-in-law, and I have never heard my own mother ever speak to my sister that way. No, my sister went to Cal State Long Beach and UC Riverside, and she got a master's degree, and she did not use her body to earn. She was the one that taught me work ethic mattered, even athleticism. She was the one that told me that I gotta learn how to do push-ups and I gotta learn how to kick a ball. She she taught me what to do and how to be strong. And it wasn't just because she was a woman or I'm a man. So those
Right.
were very different things that I learned from this show and what I learned compared to mine.
Yeah, true. Yes. And also for me, like I mentioned before, also it was like for me watching Vida, it was first of all, as Ryan said, I didn't expect to see the amount of flesh and yeah, also I didn't expect that. But we're going back again where I mentioned that we are going to leave or we'll have or we'll be acting depending on how we were raised. And also, Brian, I wasn't raised like the as Lynn was raised by her mother just by using her beauty. No, I consider myself a little bit more um more
Conservative.
modest. Yes, more
Modest.
conservative. uh, but it is also a personal choice, you know. It's not that you have to follow this or that. No, it is how makes you feel like you. But also I would like to add this really quick. It was really interesting to me when it comes to Ling and Doña Titas when doing this Olympias like sessions. And it is exactly like when we were talking about week number 4, um, um, when the indigenous eroticism, and week number 4 where we were reading the indigenous eroticism and colonial morality in Mexico by Silvia Marcos. It was like it still exists, you know, doing this autism and how she at the reading was considering sex in the liberal uh, way. I'll say liberal because nowadays we see it like that. The community makes it see it as liberal, you know, and but it it existed like way back before, and it is interesting, you know. So does anyone else like to add something else to the podcast?
Jasmine, is there anything you would like to ask? We had noticed that your
Mhm.
phone had died earlier, and you know, if you'd like to catch up.
Yes, my phone died. No, what were we talking about before I left or while I left?
We're into the conclusion and synthesis, and what we
Oh,
think
the
overall about
conclusion.
about the podcast, and what we think overall of the show.
The podcast. Oh, doing the podcast. It was fun. I liked my group members. It was kind of hard to communicate, but we made it work. I'm very happy. Well, I do a podcast. That's where I joined back. Ryan was talking about whether he would do a podcast. I would do a podcast. I personally don't think so. I don't think it's my how do I say it? Like I don't think it's something that I'm good at. So I don't think I will. But other than that, if like I participate in one, I would be willing to do that. Oh my god. Thank you guys. Jacqueline.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I feel like overall we gained a lot of like knowledge of this unit 3, and we were able to like guess consider things differently in like a, I guess, intelligent manner. And overall, I really enjoyed working with you guys, all of you guys, and I hope to see you guys soon, maybe.
Okay, guys. Thank you, guys, for the collaboration. Thank you. It was really a new experience for me because I've never done a podcast before. But it was really interesting to know you and to know the way you guys perceived Vida, you know.
Yeah.
And thank you,
Yeah.
guys.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Jasmine. Thank you,
Thank
Jacqueline.
you.
Thank you, Brian, for the collaboration.
Thank you
And
for
yes,
having me here. Appreciate it.
okay. Thank you, and see you soon. Bye bye.